You are in the correct classroom. Dave Rich is having some traveling issues getting back home, so he called me yesterday to see if I would. He said whoever's teaching in the young adult class this week, if they'd be willing to move everybody in here, and I was like, well, just so happens to be me, so that worked out. So this is our young adult class. For those of you who are unaware of what we're doing, we meet right back over there. Just a couple reminders that are actually for them, but it's okay if you see too. Our Bible study, young adult Bible study, is this Tuesday at 7. We meet in the remote. We're studying through the book of James. That will be this Tuesday, and there's your reminder. We're studying through a three-part, if you will, three-quarter series. Last quarter we studied leading to Jesus. We looked at Jesus in the Old Testament. What did the Old Testament point? How did the Old Testament point toward Jesus? This quarter is learning from Jesus. It's the life and teachings of Jesus. And then next quarter we'll look at leaning on Jesus, the early church, and how they leaned on Jesus' teaching to be who they became. So last week, John Hodge taught our class on counting the cost. As we're going not necessarily chronologically through the life of Jesus, but we're just looking at some key teachings. And John taught on the concept of counting the cost that Jesus taught on on more than one occasion. This morning we're going to look at some of Jesus's most profound teaching on love. I mean, what we're going to look at is a very simple statement Jesus makes, but there is so much weight to what he says. He makes a statement that really categorizes, if you will, I don't know what other word to say, really shows how important this whole concept is. And we'll get into that in just a minute. Let's have a word of prayer before we begin, and we'll jump into this. Father in heaven, we thank you so much for this morning. We thank you for this time we have to be here together, to fellowship with one another, to study together, and to just spend our time in worshiping you together. God, we thank you so much for those who have made it out this morning. We just pray that this time together will be an encouragement, a blessing to each of us, and that we ask that for each class, each class, each teacher, each student that's going on this morning. I pray that these are times of encouragement, that we can learn a little bit more about our relationship with you, and we can strengthen our relationship with one another. But God, we pray above everything else in these moments and in our time of worship here in a little while and in our next hour, God, I pray that above everything that you're honored and that you're glorified with the things that we say and do. We thank you so much for the time your son spent on this earth, for the words that he shared, the teachings he provided. And as we look into some of his words this morning, God, I pray that you'll help us to always be open to see how his words, any words in your word, applies to our lives, how we can make it fit, how we can make it stick in our lives, and just help us to be moldable, help us to be shapeable. And again, God, above everything, we pray that we honor you this morning. We pray all this in Jesus' name. Amen. Okay, we're going to be in Matthew chapter 22 to begin with this morning. In this section in Matthew chapter 22, Jesus is asked a question that it really seems deeply theological, just the way it's presented, but it's very much a practical question. He's being queried, he's being questioned, if you will, by the leaders. And one asks, "Teacher, which command in the law is the most important?" And Jesus gives an answer that, like I said, in my opinion, is very simple, very practical, but is incredibly profound with the way he says this. Out of all of the commands, and we know in the old law, even we know in the old law there's 619 laws. There's a lot of commands. I mean, even if you reduce it down to the 10 commandments under the old law, still that's a lot. I mean, but Jesus reduces everything down to two concepts. In verses 36 through about 40, he reduces it down to two ideas, and we'll look at those in more detail. You probably know where we're going. But as we look at this morning, here's what I want you to think about. This is a concept that for us really ought to simplify some things. This really ought to kind of hone the way we look at about everything. There's a for us as we live life today, there's a lot of complexities. There's a lot of challenges that we have to deal with. But Jesus brings everything down to one thing. He's going to say, just love, and he's going to specify. Sort of. I mean, he's going to say there's two aspects of this that really matter. But what we'll see, and you, like I said, you probably know where we're going. What we're going to see is covers everything. I mean, there's no part that this doesn't cover. And like I said, this ought to be stabilizing for us. That we can look at everything through the lens of, am I doing one of these two things? Am I doing both of these things? And that kind of ought to balance out every way we look at everything in life. There's an author, passed away in, I believe, the 80s, maybe 90s, a guy named James Baldwin, that said, it's the responsibility of free men to trust and to celebrate what is constant. Birth, struggle, and death are constant. And so is love, though we may not always think so. Well, what we'll see this morning is Jesus thought so. Jesus will tell us that love ought to be a constant, that love ought to permeate every aspect of our lives, and it ought to flow in two directions. It ought to flow vertically and it ought to flow horizontally. So let's look at Matthew chapter 22, and I want you to think this. I'm going to ask you two questions at the end. I'll ask this one again, but don't answer it because this is just for you. If somebody were to look at your schedule, if somebody were to look at your conversations, your priorities, would they see, or what would they conclude that you love the most? Now, nobody raise your hand. You're not supposed to answer that. But just think about that as we look through this. So let's look at Matthew chapter 22, verses 37 and 38 to begin with. Well, let me just back up to 34. That just makes sense. When the Pharisees heard that he had silenced the Sadducees, they came together. And one of them, an expert in the law, asked a question to test him. Teacher, which commandment in the law is the greatest? He said to them, love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your mind. This is the greatest and most important, or the first command. And we'll stop right there for right now. So what Jesus says is, like I said, it's a very simple statement. And really, for these leaders, these Jewish experts in the law, this is not a new concept to them. And we'll look at another passage that we kind of look at. Jesus says this is a new idea. It's not a new idea, it's a new level of it. But when Jesus says, love the Lord your God with all your heart, your soul, your mind, that this is the first and the greatest, this is the foremost. Different translations say different things. All the same thing. It said this is the number one thing. He's talking about the totality of love here. That everything about you, everything about us ought to be focused toward God. This is a comprehensive love. This is not I love God when things are going well. This is not I love God when things go my way or when it works out for my schedule or for whatever. This heart, soul, and mind, and again, we could really kind of take a deep dive on this heart, soul, and mind from a Jewish perspective, because that is exactly what it means. It's everything about your being. I mean, it's your total existence is focused on loving God. This is not a Sunday love, and this is not a Sunday morning love. This is who you are in essence. And this is probably, this concept is familiar to us in that we've heard this a lot, I'm sure. Most of you have probably heard different sermons, Bible classes about this for many years. But this whole idea of loving God with our whole heart means our affections are shaped by Him. The things that we're drawn to, the things that interest us, that's our affections. The things that we decide, I like this, I enjoy doing this. That's going to be shaped by our love for God. Now, like I said, that all sounds really simple until you start really putting it into practice. Until you start saying, this is life. This is what I do all the time. To love God with your whole soul, that means your identity. That, again, in the Jewish mindset, your soul was your innermost being. That means everything at your core is focused on God. And to love Him with your mind, that really touches home, doesn't it? Because if you're loving God with your affections are focused on loving God, if the totality of your soul is focused on loving God, you're going to do some things that people are going to see, right? There's going to be some physical evidence. You're going to take care of people. You're going to be friendly. You're going to be nice. You're going to treat people the right way. We'll get to that command in a second. But when you love God with all your mind, who knows that? God and who? You. You could fool other people. I mean, you could. But this idea of loving God with all your mind means that's not what you're about. It means that you center your thoughts. You center everything about the way you think, the way you process things. That's all submitted to God. We tend to divide life into categories, don't we? We compartmentalize. That we say, this is my church life, this is my work life, this is my home life, and I kind of keep those away from each other. It's kind of like our clothes, right? I mean, you have your church clothes for me, my church clothes hang on one side of my closet so I don't mess them up ever. But then we come home, we put on our play clothes, right? Because that's you get in your comfies, and that's different. That's how you compartmentalize those. Well, that isn't what this is. This is not the love for God. There's no compartmentalizing. There's no love God play clothes. There's no love God church clothes that look really nice in front of everyone. That's not what it's about. Jesus refutes that whole idea with this statement. When he says, love your God, love the Lord your God with everything you are, what he's talking about really here is allegiance. He's saying, to whom are you loyal? Where do your loyalties lie? And again, this may not be a way we think about this very often. That when we're told to love God with everything we have, that we're talking about, do we pledge our allegiance to God? Because that's what Jesus is saying, is that this permeates everything about who you are. And this is not emotion. And I think we all know this. And when we're talking about the love that Jesus is talking about, he's not talking about the yesterday kind of love where you buy a card and chocolate candy and everything's good. That isn't what this is about. This is covenant loyalty. This is, I am aligned with God and God only. We trust God. We trust His authority. We obey His commands. Sometimes we don't get the commands. Sometimes we don't grasp exactly why I'm supposed to do it, but we submit. Because we love God so much, we want to keep His will even above our own. Now, this really confronts comfortable faith, comfortable Christianity. And by that I mean, and I have comfortable Christianity in my notes, but I changed it to faith because I think that's better. Because we can be comfortable and not love God with all your heart, soul, and mind, right? Because it may be uncomfortable to love God that way. Because that means when God says that I pray for those, my enemies and those who persecute, that's uncomfortable. I don't want to do that. But when you love God this way, you say, okay, I'll do that. I'll serve the person that is not that appreciative. I'll be friendly. I'll be the one who helps up the person that nobody else will talk to, because I'm going to love God with everything about me. This answers the question, do we love God for who He is or for what He does for us? Ooh. That's mean, isn't it? I'm not supposed to say that stuff publicly. But that's really what he's saying, is do you like, it's kind of like what Jesus asked Peter. Peter, do you love me? Do you like me? Are we friends at all? This is that question for us. Do we love God with everything? Or is it we like to hang out with God on Sundays in our church clothes? That's the line Jesus is putting in the sand here. So we have to ask ourselves, what is it that competes for our wholehearted love? And again, you don't have to answer that, but you need to answer it for yourself. What is it that gets in our way? What is it that causes us to be distracted by this? And then I actually found this question. This wasn't my idea. What does this say? What does loving God with all of your mind look like in an age of distraction? Man, we are the most distracted people in the entire history of the world. I mean, I don't know that for sure, but it sounds good to say it that way. But I mean, like this, I don't know if you noticed, but my phone made 2 noises since class started. And it's all I can do to go, what's that? I mean, and we all, I mean, I would say 99% of them carry their phones around with us. If it makes a noise, we look at it. If somebody calls, it's like, okay, everybody knows you have your phone with you. You got to answer it practically, you know. We're distracted by whether it's other people, it's the stuff, whether it's on our phones, whether it's, you know, wherever. We're the most distracted age, it seems. There it goes again for some reason. There's a book the guy wrote, I think in 2022, called The Anxious Generation, about the younger millennial generation and the Gen Z generation, about because of so many distractions, it just makes us anxious. That it's like, I mean, we're like, you don't know which way to turn. How does loving God with all your mind fit into all of that? And that goes back to what I said originally. This ought to give us some stability. This ought to give us a sense of peace that I don't have to pay attention to all the politics, all the news, all the junk going on in the world. Because my focus is on God. And that kind of levels out everything else. Okay, I don't know if we have a mic person or not, but this is where I usually ask for questions or comments back there. But
I kind of love what's up there on the board.
Mm-hmm.
Is where our joy in the Lord comes from.
Yeah.
The other one, like you said, that's emotional. That's happy.
Yeah.
If we live with that in our hearts, that's where our true joy in being a Christian.
Yeah. What Terry said is that this is joy love, not happiness love. That, I mean, this is the joy, this is the love that builds your joy in your relationship with God, even when happiness doesn't always pan out. I mean, we get that. Those are 2 different ideas. Okay, so let's look at what Jesus says next. In verse 39, he says, this is the 30th, this is the greatest and first commandment. The second is like it. Love your neighbor as yourself. Now, this, I have to tell you, I kind of did a little deep dive on this just because I never really thought about this very much before. Jesus connects this love for God and for other people so tightly. I mean, there's no separating this. So he says, the first is this, love God with everything you have. The second is like, the old King James, I think, says likened unto it, which means it's the same concept. Jesus sets the absolute standard right here. Now, again, most of you are probably sitting there going, yeah, I've heard this a million times. I've been a Christian since I was 13 years old. I'm 70, whatever. I've heard this over and over. Okay, good. But have you ever thought about this? I mean, thought about the way Jesus sets this bar so high in this. And here's what I want to ask you. What does he mean when he says, love your neighbor as yourself? If you have an answer, if you can throw a short answer out, what does he mean by that?
Put others before yourself.
Put others before yourself. That's not what he says. He says, love your neighbor as yourself. What does that mean?
It tells me that I love myself enough to follow Jesus. And if I looked at what he did, he loved God more than what he put up with at the cross. And so I should treat my neighbor that same way with that same sense of urgency. I want them too
Yeah.
to have that love.
I want the very best for my neighbor. And Richard, what Richard said was we put them above ourselves. That's kind of what this means, but that's not what he says. Jesus knows, I mean, okay, here's the principle. We know we're supposed to put others above ourselves. We're supposed to care more about other people than we do ourselves. But Jesus knows how we are. We're going to take care of ourselves. I mean, for the most part. We're going to be conscious of our comforts. We're going to be conscious of our, if we're hungry, we're going to take care of it. If we're cold, we're going to take care of it. Jesus knows that we care about our own comfort. We notice our own needs, right? And I don't think that this is Jesus encouraging us to be selfish, but I mean, Jesus knows we're humans and that we're going to prioritize our own well-being. And I don't think he's saying in this place, I don't think he's saying don't do that. I know we're not supposed to be super selfish and self-focused, but he says, but you kind of are. So think of other people the same way. Love them the same way you love yourself. Which means, that kind of goes back to our James study. Which means when you walk by somebody you see and they're cold and hungry, you're not going to go, oh, I hope that works out for that guy. Because you would not do that to yourself. I mean, that's a high standard. When he says, love your neighbor as yourself, he's redirecting that. I think it's a human instinct, but he's redirecting that also outward. That's pretty strong. I mean, like I said, there's not much you're going to ignore about yourself. If I'm feeling down, if I'm feeling dejected, I'm gonna do something. I'm gonna talk to somebody. I'm gonna figure out some way to make myself feel better. Jesus says, do that for somebody else. If you see somebody else having a rough time, give them the same care you would give yourself. That makes it a much higher. All I can think of is it turns up the volume on that. I mean, that's the only way I can think of it. Chloe.
So it's necessary to love ourselves. God created us with a survival instinct. That doesn't mean we get to eat cake, but it means that we have to sustain ourselves. In order to love somebody else, we have to sustain ourselves. So let's take a mother with a child, for instance. If the mother doesn't take care of herself, she can't take care of the child. She gets sick and dies. Right. And so loving ourselves is not wrong as long as we're taking care of our basic needs.
Yeah.
But therefore, we take care of our own basic needs, but the purpose isn't necessarily so that we'll survive. Although God created us with a very strong survival instinct. Yeah. But part of the purpose is we take care of ourselves so that we can love somebody else and give them at least their basic needs.
Right. Yeah, you've got to take care of yourself in order to do this. I mean, like I said, it's not, I don't believe this is permission to be entirely self-focused. But I think it's Jesus understanding humans and goes, you know you're going to take care of yourself. Do the same thing for other people. Love other people. I mean, it's like I think Richard has used this in a sermon before. It's like the announcement when you're getting ready to fly. If the thing drops out of the whatever it's called, and you have to put your mask on, put yours on, and then take care of the kid next to you. That to me, when I first heard that, I was a kid going, hey, what are we doing here? But you get it. I mean, take care of yourself so you can take care of that other person. That's the idea, I think, of love your neighbor in the same way you're going to take care of yourself.
Well, and also, too, Jesus always, in his teaching, related everything to things that would relate to the people he was talking to. Yeah. And because, as you said, we are by nature selfish beings. Yeah. Everybody knows how to love yourself. And to tie that with loving your neighbor is just that's a connection that is very strong.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, and like I said, it's the acknowledgement that we take care of ourselves, but then also the further acknowledgement is project that outward. What's that going to take? It's going to take some patience. It's going to take some empathy. And again, we do that for ourselves. You know, we tend to be more patient with ourselves than anybody else. But it's going to take some generosity. It's going to take some honesty. When we see somebody in need, and whether it's a physical, emotional, spiritual need, whatever, we got to be honest with ourselves and say, now, I'd want somebody to take care of me in that situation. So how about I help this person out? What Jesus is talking about is not that sentimental observing approval or that sentiment. He's talking about active goodwill. He's talking about make this something you actually do. Exhibit this in your culture. We'll look to that in a minute too. We'll look at this in our class in a couple of weeks. We'll look at a specific thing, but where Jesus explains the concept of a neighbor. We have to grasp that this whole idea of love your neighbor as yourself isn't geographical. I mean, this isn't limited to the people in your proximity. And like I said, we'll see in Luke 10 what Jesus says about your neighbor. But this includes our family, our friends, our church family. It's our coworkers. It's the difficult people. It is the neighbor that never takes care of their yard or whatever that you're not real happy with. This is all encompassing. For those of you with kids, that's in my notes back there. It's different. It's more prevalent here, I guess. This impacts our families. How do we deal with those difficult people in front of our kids? How do we deal how do our families, how do our spouses, how do our kids, how do everybody, how do they see us react to those people who need love? Are we showing this love in a way that, are we projecting this self-care out to people in regard to forgiveness in our family? This is love your neighbor as yourself. Your neighbor may be across the hall in your house. What does that look like? Our kids especially are going to learn what it means to do this from watching us. How do we love? If you're not married, it impacts how you date. It impacts how you relate to your coworkers. It impacts your friend group. How do you pick the people you spend time with? Love that Jesus is talking about is not manipulative or self-serving. In fact, that's the whole idea of as yourself. It's outward serving. We're going to seek, like John said, we're going to seek other people's spiritual good if we're loving them as ourselves. Look over to John chapter 13. Keep your something there at Matthew 22, but look at John 13. Because Jesus says, and here's an each other or a one another I want to relate us to here. John 13, 34 and 35. I give you a new command. Love one another just as I have loved you. Okay, you've heard this before too, but just let's clarify that. This new command is not love one another because they've known that since Leviticus. That's love each other is part of God's deal. But the value Jesus puts on it, the step Jesus takes up, love one another just as I have loved you. You are also to love one another. By this, everyone will know that you're my disciples if you love one another. So let's think about that whole idea for just a second. Let's relate this one another to us here, to the church. What does it look like for us to love one another in such a way that everybody sees? He says everybody's going to know that's who we are by how we love one another. That automatically takes gossip off the list. That automatically takes, I can't hang out with this person because we don't like the same sports team off the list. Whatever. All that stuff is eliminated because of this, loving people as yourself. Jesus says, here's the elevation of it. You're going to love each other like I loved you. Now, we don't have to talk much. I mean, how much did he love us? I mean, preposterous amounts of love. And that's what he's talking about here. Our love for each other in the church ought to protect our unity. I mean, we ought to have no questions about whether we're a unified body because of the love we have for each other. It ought to be the reason why we bear one another's burdens. We shouldn't have to command that. I mean, we shouldn't have to coerce that sometime. It should be who we are. Hebrews 10, 24 and 25. Well, let me look at, I'm just going to read 1 Peter 4, 8 through 10 real quick. Above all, maintain constant love for one another. Now, Peter is writing to Christians. Maintain constant love for one another, since love covers a multitude of sins. Being hospitable to one another without complaining. Just as each has received a gift, use it to serve others as good stewards of the varied graces of God. That's the idea, is that we love each other because of this, but because of who we are. Because of this unity that we have in Jesus. Now, how do we do that? Now let's look back at Hebrews chapter 10. Hebrews chapter 10, verse 24 and 25. These are probably brand new verses. You probably never heard these before. And let us watch out for one another to provoke love and good works, not neglecting to gather together, as some are in the habit of doing, but encouraging each other, and all the more as you see the day approaching. We show love for each other by showing up for each other. Okay, let me ask you this. Do you really love me if you show up here once every 3 months? I mean, I'm sorry, that seems harsh and mean. People watching online like, who's this guy? That's not Dave. I mean, what we're saying is, I'm not going to love you as I love myself spiritually. If I'm not going to show up and encourage you and spur you on to love and good, or stir you up to love and good works, I'm not showing the love that Jesus is talking about here. And it's, I mean, you've heard me say this. I think Richard has said something very similar to this before. The easiest thing to do in the Christian life is show up here. But it matters so, so much. It's encouraging to each other. We all have our places we're supposed to sit. We've been bumped out of our regular pew because we're back there and we come in, we have to roam around the wilderness and try to find. But when you get used to seeing somebody across the way or whatever and they're not there for a while, I hope you wonder, where are they? I hope they're not sick. Maybe I'll check on them. I'll check on them when I get home. But if it's you start going, I guess so-and-so isn't coming now. Doesn't care about how we are. And I get it. We're supposed to care about them, but they need to care about us too. You need to care about everybody here. And like I said, the easiest thing to do is show up. Show up and be the encourager. Show up and be the person that is doing this, is pushing each other on to love and to good works. Your encouragement by your presence is so valuable, and you don't know it unless you're not here, and then you don't know it because you're not here. But we need to understand that emotional support, that presence support matters. That's why that verse is there, because it's the way we show love to each other like this. Now, back to John 13, 34 and 35. This also means everybody. This is how the people looking at us are going to know what love is. We get to exhibit, we get to define real love to the world around us by how we treat each other, by how we treat them. That's a huge responsibility, but that's a great privilege. That people ought to be able to come in here or to go by here when they see our giveaway, or when they see a car care clinic, or when they see our parking lot full on Sunday nights or Wednesday, they go, man, those people must really care about each other. I wonder what's going on in there. And I know that never happens. I mean, that very rarely happens, but it's the idea that at least our neighborhood ought to just know those people love each other. And if I need something, I know those people will love me enough to help me. So we have to remember that this type loves our communities. It loves the people that everybody else overlooks. Like our diaper bank, that is such a valuable thing. I mean, things like that are showing at least the people across the street and the people driving by, hey, those people care enough to give away diapers. Those people care.
We had that guy that has the Halloween stuff all the time.
Yeah.
He came to donate to the car clinic
Yeah.
or something.
Yeah.
Just because he saw how we treat each other.
Yeah. She's talking about the guy across the street that has all the decorations. And I'm telling you, we've put stuff on that guy's door for years and zero response. And then this past summer, he came over and wanted us to wash his car and tried to give it, I don't know, gave somebody an amount of money. We're like, no, you don't need to pay for that. He goes, yeah. He goes, I get tired of people seeing all you people do stuff for nothing. It's just like, all right. But I mean, a little bit snarky, but he notices. I mean, and that is so valuable. Stuff like that, really, and that's what this is about. Love your neighbor like you love yourself. That's what Jesus is talking about here. This type of love becomes the filter through which everything else passes. Now, this is the statement. I mean, all these are super powerful statements, in my opinion. I mean, Jesus said them, so. But the next thing he says is the part that I have to say that I never really dug into as much as I have before. He says, all the law and the prophets, this is, I'll just read it to you. It's right there, but let's read it in the context. The second's like it, love your neighbor as yourself. All the law and the prophets depend on these two commands. What other words are in your translations besides depend? Huh? Hang. What else? Verse 40, right? Yeah. What other translations say? Huh? Demand, depend, hang. What is Jesus saying here? Okay, let's imagine you're in the crowd where Jesus is talking, and Jesus says, all the law and the prophets hang, depend, are connected, are the foundation of all of those commands are those two concepts. That is a gargantuan statement for Jesus to make. What's the law to them? Well, it's the law. It's the law of Moses. It's the way they've lived their lives for centuries. The prophets, that's all the things pointing to their future. It's all these great Elijah, Ezekiel, all these great prophets of their history. And Jesus says, everything that has been done can be summed up in these two commands. Now that, again, like I said, that's one of those moments that I think would have been kind of a gasp moment. That the crowd would be like, whoa, that's an impressive summary. And that's what Jesus is doing. He's summarizing everything in those two sentences. Love God, love people. Yes, sir, over here. Do you have Mike over here? I mean, it's Larry over here, but.
I was just thinking about the excellent job that the teacher did Wednesday night talking about the philosophy of determinism and Calvinism. And people who follow that line of religious thinking would sum up God in one word, and that is God is sovereign.
Yeah.
And of course he is. But I think what I think we believe is that the ultimate characteristic of God is love.
Right.
And he demonstrates his sovereignty in a loving way. And so love requires risk.
Yeah.
But the determinist or the Calvinist to say God takes no risk, he will make everybody do what he wants them to do. And that is the fundamental conflict between, I think, a correct view of Scripture and a deterministic view.
Yeah.
Is that God, in his sovereignty, to quote a rough quote of the theologian Charles O. White, God is sovereign but gives us some sovereignty, but he still, in his sovereignty, he gives us free will, but he remains sovereign. And so, to me, this is one of the scriptures that says God's primary characteristic is love.
Yeah. And the risk there, I like that idea, is that God says, I expect you to do it. I expect you to behave this way, but I know sometimes you're not. So let's just sum this up. Obedience that lacks love is just record keeping. I'm doing this because I have to. Check in the box. That's obedience without love. our teaching, our doctrine, if it lacks love, it's critical and it's harsh. Do this. This is what they're supposed to do now. Do it. I recall a guy in my past years ago who, anytime he had the Lord's Supper talk, it was immediately went right to, we're commanded to do this. We're commanded to do this first day of the week. We're commanded to do it that. Oh, that's true. But there's a lot there. I mean, there's a lot more than that. So our teaching, our doctrine without love is just, it's a kind of just record. It's just rules. Service without love is just performative. If I'm doing this just because I'm going to, go rake your crazy lawn just because I have to, and look, everybody look at me, raking the lawn. That's just perform. That's not what Jesus is talking about. Jesus is talking about making this everything. Now, we get how this looks in our families. We get how this looks with our conversation. How does this look in our checkbook? How does this look in our bank account? How does this look in our worship? Are we engaging in worship in the way that says that I understand that these two things matter more than anything? What love ought to do, how love ought to transform us. Love ought to deepen our obedience. It ought to help us understand why I'm doing these things. It's because I love God so much. It ought to help us in our decision making. I talked about that at the very beginning. This ought to simplify some things for us. Do I want to do this with my time, my money, my whatever? Let me think. Does this show how much I love God? Does this show how much I love people? If the answer is no to either of those, the answer is no, I don't do that thing. Because that clarifies how I think. And it also guards against extremes. I don't have time to look at this, but you think of the two extremes on this. Jesus deals with it in Matthew 23, the next chapters, the rigid legalism of the Pharisees. And he says, woe to you, scribes and Pharisees, hypocrites. And you get down to chapter 23, verse 23, when he says, congratulations, you did your tithe of anise, cumin, and mint like you were supposed to. Attaboy. But you forgot about loving people. You forgot about justice, mercy, and faith. Now, he doesn't say pick one or the other and do it really well. He says, you ought to have done this without leaving this undone. That it's all about how we love people. It's all about how we show and how we express our love. But we also can't go to casual indifference. Romans 12, those verses are talking about how we make the effort to serve each other, how we make the effort to show this love. This isn't, we don't show love by just kind of being passive and just letting religion, letting faith, letting God's love come to us. Yeah, the more we do it, it gets easier. The more we do it, it becomes habitual. It becomes part of the practice of who we are. So the question I had for you at the very beginning, somebody looked at your schedule, conversations, priorities. Are they going to know who you love? The other question is, how do we guard against loving church activity more than we love God? And listen, this is what I do for a living. This is something I have to remind myself. It's not about just doing the stuff. It's about the people it touches. And we have to be conscious of that. When we learn from Jesus, what we learn is that love is not a supplemental. It is everything who we are. Any closing thoughts you can just yell out?
Oh, well, 1 Corinthians 13, 4 through 8.
Yeah.
That's a definite.
Yeah. Yeah, 1 Corinthians 13, here's what love is. It does all of these things and it doesn't do some things. Okay. Next week, Dave should be standing here. We'll be back there.